When my uncle left me his estate, my cousins tried to steal it by forging his will. Fighting for what was mine led me to discover a strength I never knew I had. I'll never forget the day I got the call. I was sitting at my desk, wrapping up a project, when my phone buzzed. It was from a lawyer's office, one I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said I should. That call was about to change everything I thought I knew about my family. The lawyer, Mr. Hensley, explained that my Uncle Tom had passed away a few months prior. I hadn't even known he was sick. We'd been distant for years. Tom was my mother's older brother, a reserved man who lived on his quiet farm, hours away from the city. My mother had passed away years ago, and after that, the family had drifted apart. Uncle Tom and I had barely spoken since. Mr. Hensley told me Uncle Tom had left a will, and I was named as the primary beneficiary of his estate. It wasn't a huge inheritance, but it included his house, the land, and some personal savings. My heart raced as I processed this. Uncle Tom had chosen me, out of everyone. He must have cared more than I realized. But as I'd soon learn, I wasn't the only one interested in his estate. A few days later, I decided to visit Tom's farm. When I arrived, the house looked different than I remembered. It wasn't just old. It was empty, stripped bare. The furniture, the decorations, even Tom's personal belongings were gone. The only thing left was dust and a few scattered papers. That's when I knew something was off. Who had taken everything? I called Mr. Hensley, and he seemed just as puzzled as I was. He assured me that Tom's estate was mine, that no one else had legal rights to it. But then he paused. There was another will that had suddenly come to light, supposedly written just before Tom's passing. This new will left everything to my cousins, Ben and Lisa. I could feel my stomach twist with anger. I knew my cousins. They weren't the most trustworthy people. But they'd managed to present this new will as if it were legitimate. I didn't buy it. Uncle Tom was not the type to make last-minute decisions like that, especially cutting me out completely. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. I started visiting places around town, talking to neighbors, even tracking down the notary who had supposedly witnessed the new will. One thing led to another, and it wasn't long before I found something that felt like proof. There was no official record of this notary, and the signature didn't match the way Tom used to sign things. This will was fake. I confronted Ben and Lisa. At first, they denied everything, but they were terrible liars. The more I pressed, the more they started cracking. Finally, Ben let it slip. They'd found Tom's original will, and realizing everything was left to me, had decided to forge a new one. They'd cleaned out the house, planning to sell the property and pocket the money before I even had a chance to show up. With this new information, I took my case to court. It was grueling. My cousins painted me as greedy, someone just after the family's money. But I kept pushing, kept gathering evidence. Slowly, I built a case, piece by piece, until there was no way for them to deny it. After months of back and forth, the judge ruled in my favor. Ben and Lisa were forced to return everything they'd taken. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. Not because of the money or the land, but because I'd stood up to people who tried to erase me from my own family's legacy. Looking back, I still feel a twinge of sadness. I never got to thank Uncle Tom for leaving that inheritance to me, for thinking of me after all those years. I wonder what he'd say if he knew what had happened, if he'd be proud of how I fought for what was right. But one thing's for sure, I'll never let anyone take advantage of me or my family's legacy again. Update 1. It's been a few weeks since the court ruling, and while I thought the dust had settled, it turns out I was wrong. While cleaning out Uncle Tom's house, I stumbled upon a stack of old letters hidden behind a drawer in his desk. They were all addressed to me. In each one, he talked about our family, about memories he had of my mom and me. He mentioned regrets he had about being distant, but hoped that leaving the estate to me would bring us closer in some way. It was surreal, almost like he'd left these letters to remind me of how much he cared. I felt even more grateful and, at the same time, even angrier at my cousins for trying to erase this connection. Update 2. Just as I was settling into a routine, guess who showed up at my door? Ben. He had this nervous energy about him, and I could tell he wasn't there to apologize. He tried to pitch this idea. He wanted a portion of the estate back, arguing that it was only fair since he and Lisa had always been closer to Tom. I couldn't believe the nerve. I calmly told him that the case was closed and that he'd already taken more than his share by lying and stealing. He didn't take it well and left in a huff, but I don't regret a single word I said. Update 3. Just when I thought everything with this inheritance was finally over, I got a surprise call from Mr. Hensley. Apparently, Uncle Tom had a few more assets. A small investment fund he hadn't mentioned in the will, but that legally belongs to me. It's not a life-changing amount, but it feels like one last gift from Uncle Tom, almost as if he's watching over this entire ordeal. And knowing I have something he genuinely wanted me to have gives me a sense of peace. Now, I'm planning to invest part of it in restoring the farm, keeping a piece of his legacy alive and honoring the connection we should have had. Final update. It's been almost a year since all this began, and I can finally say I feel at peace. After months of legal battles, confrontations, and emotional ups and downs, I decided to do something meaningful with Uncle Tom's legacy. I renovated his old farmhouse, turning it into a cozy bed and breakfast. It felt like the right way to honor him and the memories I discovered along the way. The house is now full of life, with guests enjoying the beautiful land he cherished. Last week, while going through some final paperwork, I found a small handwritten note that Tom must have tucked into an old book. It simply said, "Remember where you came from, and take pride in it." It was a short message, but somehow it gave me the closure I needed. Uncle Tom may not have been around much when I was young, but in his way, he made sure I had something to remember him by. I realized then that this wasn't just about an inheritance. It was about family, even the imperfect parts. I've let go of the resentment, even toward Ben and Lisa. I understand that they were driven by their own insecurities and greed, but they don't have power over me anymore. I found strength I didn't know I had, and I'm proud of the person I've become through this journey. Now, every time I watch the sunrise over the land, I feel grateful. This farm, this life. I know Uncle Tom would be proud too.